Hi, I'm Dr. Tronél Hellberg from G-sential theory of music, and in this video we're continuing this journey of how to assess music performance. In this video I'm going to specifically look at how we determine the level of playing. And at this stage I really still think of it from a very broad perspective. And once I get to discussing specific exam components like pieces or oral, then I will provide you with further detail. So let me share my presentation with you. Now, the first thing that I would like to start with is the awarding of marks. Then I'm going to move on to commenting and also how to remain consistent during an exam. Now, if we look at the awarding of marks, my whole objective here is to guide you towards finding your own point of reference when assessing learners. And I'm going to do that by just sharing some ideas with you and posing some questions that you can ask yourself. So first of all, I want to ask yourself, what is it to be too strict, too lenient, and just right? Secondly, I want you to reflect on your own personal experience. When you were a student, when you were, taking subject music at school, which examiner inspired you, motivated you, but also which ones did you feel is really discouraging you and actually just making you feel I'm not good enough? Because if the examiner is too strict, that's exactly the effect they're going to have. But if you find them to be positive and encouraging, they're going to help you to actually tap in deeper into your talent and also to become more confident. The next question that I want to ask you is, how do your marks compare to other examiners, especially examiners that are more experienced? If your marks are, say, 5% or more out, so too strict or too lenient, and it's a recurring thing, you have to maybe just consider and rethinking the way you approach your marks. Now we get to the important question: how do I determine my point of reference? And I want you again to think back to your own exams. You know exactly the type of work you presented, the level you played it at, what comments you got, what marks you got. Okay, so think of your exams, think of the competitions that you participated in. Then secondly, I want you to think of, if you're assessing a learner, if they played this specific piece for a Royal Schools exam, a Rock School exam, whatever exam, what would they typically get? What mark, what comment? Okay, and you keep that in mind when you are assessing. The next thing is, and this is very important, where do you start? Do I start from 0 or do I start from 100? Now, if you start from 0, you basically assume that it's almost impossible to get 100%. And the scenario I just want to paint here, you have amazing students. They are so talented. You listen to the piece, but you can honestly not find anything wrong. Now, if you use the the guideline of starting from 0, you're going to likely say, well, they can't get 100%, so I need to subtract something. Sorry, but my question to you is, how will you justify subtracting 2 marks or 2%? Of course, the other way is to go into the exam neutral, or say, okay, you start with 100 and then from there we see what happens. Because if you do that, you say, well, it is possible to get 100% in exceptional cases. So I'm going to give you such an exceptional case. Recently, Lizandi van Sittert is busy with a master's degree in Italy, and for a final accompaniment exam, she got 100%. She then also got 100% for a final program that she played. Now, of course, this is exceptional. And my point is, if you can achieve that at master's level, surely you can also achieve it at school level. So moving on to point 6, and that is penalization. So how do we actually penalize? So for me, there are two things that you need to keep in mind. The one is the severity of the mistake, but also the percentage it accounts for. So, if the learner made just one mistake or two mistakes, will that really justify subtracting 10%? Okay, so put it in context of the larger picture. Now we get to how do we decide on a mark? My advice to you is sit with the rubric in front of you. And then as the learner is playing, where do I place this learner in terms of the marks as well as the comments? Sorry. And then lastly, what kind of an examiner do you want to be? I don't know about you, but I always aspire to be the one that motivates and encourages learners. And just because I know how it is to be on the receiving end of the stick and how horrible it is. So yes, I don't see the point in that. So I want to encourage them. I want them to really become the best musician that they can possibly be. Now let's move on to commenting. Now, in our article, the ABCs of giving feedback to colleagues, Ashley Hurley writes, providing feedback is so much more than sharing some helpful information with another person regarding his or her work. It's a gift. A chance to help someone improve themselves or their work, and ultimately our students will benefit. If you think about it, feedback is as much about you as the person you're providing it to. Your feedback is a reflection of you, the quality of it, and the time you spend giving it, the effort basically, well, I want to add the effort that you put into it, shows how much or how little you value the feedback. Sorry, how little, let's just start that again. The quality of it and the time you spend giving it shows how much or how little you value the feedback process. The fact that someone is asking you for your feedback speaks volumes. After all, someone has made himself or herself vulnerable to you. They have invested time in their work and trust you and your professional opinion. I hope thinking about feedback this way puts you in the right frame of mind when evaluating someone's work, or more accurately, their labor of learning. Isn't it beautiful? The effort that they put into it. Now, let's have a look at the second aspect when it gets to commenting, and that's constructive feedback versus destructive criticism. So if we look at constructive feedback, it really comes from a place of compassion and encouragement, and the objective is to help the learner. While destructive criticism really comes from a negative and a critical space, and it ends hurting people, being sarcastic, or even insulting. Now, you as examiner might say, well, I didn't mean it in that way, but it brings me to my next point, and that is, why did you say it in the first place? Why didn't you say what you mean? I want you to always ask yourself, how can I help and encourage the learner? How can I be the piece in the puzzle that's going to help them towards reaching their highest potential. Now, moving on to the next point, number 5, is all about tactful versus tactless comments. Obviously, the one carries a higher level of emotional intelligence than the other. And I want to quickly read you 2 comments and you decide which one works better for you. The first one, having crescendos and decrescendos in Baroque music is stylistically incorrect and unacceptable. Or a musical performance. In terms of style, it's important to note that crescendos and decrescendos are not typically used in Baroque music. Which one sits better with you? Now let's look at the next one. And when you start a comment, I suggest, and I actually want you to do this, to start from a positive comment, and then you move on to constructive criticism. And actually, I don't even want to use the word criticism. I think feedback is much better. Now, the next point there is, while we try to provide constructive feedback, I also don't want you to sugarcoat anything. If it was good, it was good. You don't need to say it's excellent. And choose your words wisely. Consider replacing words like must or have to and should with softer words with like could or can. Also, when it gets to phrases, you can use phrases like perhaps you can. Have you considered another way to? Although you blah, blah, blah. What if blah, blah, blah. Okay, so those are all softer ways of getting the message across. So take this example. You have to practice harder. Okay, you must. Okay, versus practicing your scales more efficiently can increase your marks. Can you feel the difference? Okay, the second one encourages. The other one makes you maybe a bit resistant to it. Now let's have a look at the third and last aspect, and that is consistency. Always ensure that you are in a good, calm, and neutral space when you enter that exam room. You can't afford that your own feelings get in the way of your attitude and your judgment towards learners and while you're busy assessing. Then the next point there is to always reflect on your baseline. Do this especially if you are a new examiner. Before the exam, think of your baseline. Think of the marks you got, what the marks would be that a learner would typically get in an external examination. And then the third point there is to keep your consistency throughout the exam. Okay, every now and then, just check it. Okay, ask yourself. So if you're examining multiple exams, what did I give learner X when he or she did this? Or am I consistent in awarding marks for scales or oral or whatever the case might be? And when you are assessing multiple exams, say 5 exams or 7 exams or even more in a day, you need to make sure and be careful that fatigue doesn't get in the way of your judgment. And how do we do that? And that is basically my final point. And that is to reset. So you can reset by just standing up, going outside, taking a break, having a cup of coffee, doing some breathing exercises, always keeping yourself well hydrated, having a bottle of water in the exam room. So all these things help us to just quickly take a quick break, give our brains a break, and that will help us to remain consistent and objective throughout the examination process.